Dawn found the city in ash and sullen flame. Smoke crawled through the teeth of the city's walls, and in the east the sky held a bruised yellow where the sun had tried and failed to claw its way above a night that had burned green. Stannis Baratheon stood upon the rampart between two scorched merlins, a rent and filthy banner snapping above him, and looked down at the river that had tried to swallow him. The chain Tyrion Lannister had raised across the Blackwater had sagged and broken in the night. Its black links lay like the bones of a slaughtered serpent, and between them drifted the shattered hulks of ships. The green fires still licked at half-drowned masts. He could taste their bitterness on his tongue, mixed with the iron tang of his own blood from a cut he had not noticed until Davos pointed it out. "You are bleeding, Your Grace," Davos had said then, as if the man it came from had not also been pulled from the jaws of the river's maelstrom. Stannis had only glanced at the wound, a nail gash at the knuckle of his sword hand. He closed his fist and felt it crust. The pain anchored him. The city was his. Bells tolled from a dozen halls and towers, a sound too weary to be triumph. The bells of Baelor, the bell of Rhaenys' sept whose dome was black with soot, the lesser bells of small septs in the maze of streets, and the high dull clang from the dockside shrines, all rang with a discord that made Stannis' jaw tighten. Victory should have the clean certainty of a hammer striking true. This was a victory dragged up by the hair from a burning river, and it made no proper sound. He had not slept, and neither had the few who mattered. Davos, gray with smoke and grief. Melisandre, serene and terrible in ashes and rubies. Ser Roland Storm with soot on his helm. Axel Florent with lips already pursed for counsel and reproof. They stood back now, obeying the temper they knew. "The Red Keep holds," Roland said. "For now. Our men have the outer ward and the Serpentine Steps are ours, but Maegor's holdfast is shut tight. The Queen took the Hound's men and the Kingsguard who remained, what was left of the gold cloaks within the keep, and shut the drawbridge. We have archers in the yard. No one goes out." "The Hound?" Stannis asked. "Gone," Davos answered quietly. "Slipped away when the green fire rose. The city boiled around him. No one stopped him, cowardice or sense." Stannis did not care. He kept his eyes on the city. The outer walls were in his hands, the gates too, the mud gate with the carcass of a galleass wedged like a broken tooth, the iron gate with its portcullis smashed, the royal gate with fresh dents where a ram had tested its pride. Streets smoldered. Some had run with blood enough to leave stains when they dried. "Your Grace," Melisandre said, her voice smoke-soft. "The night was full of the Lord's light. Your enemies were blinded. The usurper's boy cowers. See how the ash drifts like snow? In my visions I saw a city drowned in snow and skulls. But not today. Today, fire." He had no patience for her poetry. The city mattered, its bread, its coin, its rabble. The city would judge him. In the wind, the green smell from the river struck again. He closed his eyes and saw the shadow of his own ships burning, and the screams that had been no different from any screams. Men who had followed him because the law said he was king, because he paid them, because he had a face that did not laugh. The price had been deep. He had driven through all the same. "Ser Roland," he said, "you will take men and surround Maegor's holdfast. No looting in the keep or the city. Any man taken with a queen's jewel will lose his hand. Any who lay a rough hand on a woman, his head. The gold cloaks will be disarmed and sorted. Those who wear a stag will live. The rest will answer for what they did. Find Yanoslint if he still breathes. Find Haleen the pyromancer and put him under guard. I want the jars gathered. All of them." "Your Grace," Roland said, punching a fist to his breast. "Axel," Stannis said, turning. "No more talk of fires in the September. I hear so much as a word that you or your men struck a spark against Baelor stones, and I will strike a spark against you. We will have the faith quiet, not roused. This city is a tinder heap already." Axel Florent swallowed, surprised into silence. Melisandre's ruby at her throat pulsed, perhaps only with her breath. Davos shifted his weight, and Stannis could feel the question press behind his teeth before it came. "Your Grace," Davos said. "The small folk look to see who wears the crown. Let them see justice before fear. bred before banishment. You could speak to them at the steps of Baelor. Tell them what you told me. About the law, about... I know what I told you, Stannis said. He knew too well. The truth was a blade he had held so tight his palm had scarred. I will speak. Davos bowed his head and said nothing more. The wind lifted his hair, exposing the stump where his fingers ended, and for a heartbeat Stannis saw the night of the Onion, the torches at Storm's End, the faces of men who had eaten rats and leather and lived because one man had taken a law's risk. The city that had tried to drown him was held now by that man's stubborn will. Stannis's mouth flattened. Send to the September. I want the High Septon brought to me, not dragged, brought. Melisandre smiled. He will bow. They all will bow. That is why the Lord showed me this day. Stannis did not look at her. He could smell the burned hair of men in his own beard. He turned and went down from the wall. In the bowels of the Red Keep, the stones ran cool and damp, and the air smelled of old dust and breath. Even here the city's smoke had found a path. They had made a cell ready and a pallet to throw a king upon, if the queen grew too stubborn. But they had not thrown her there. Not yet. He had kept that for last, because he knew his own hardness and did not want to hear her voice until he had a proper answer for it. They had found Tyrion Lannister first, blood-caked and insensible, half-choked upon his own beard. The dwarf was small, but his mouth had always been large. A physician Stannis did not trust had bound him and bled him and said he would live or not. That had been generous of the man. Davos stood at the cell's door and waited for Stannis to decide. He was hand, Davos said. He called the green fire and the chain. Stannis's voice did not change. He will stand trial for treason and sorcery. Treason, Davos echoed. Sorcery. The wildfire burned my ships, Stannis said. If the city had burned entire, he would have burned it entire. The law will suffice. It does not need your softening. Davos's eyes did not lower. The law will suffice, he agreed, and Stannis felt the phantom of a smile and hated it. Tell the jailer, Stannis said. Tell him to keep the man alive. If he dies before he is condemned, I will take it for laziness. In the galleries above the yard, a huddle of women waited in the dimness, fingers white where they gripped their cloaks. They were good ladies who had thought their birth would shelter them from the screams of common men. They watched the yard like ghosts behind a glass, and Stannis ignored them. His steps took him to the sept within the keep, not Baelor's but the lesser chapel where Targaryen stones remembered kneeling and blood. The queen had sat her throne of wine cups here through the night. His men had told him, while the little boy who wore a crown played at being a king with words he could hardly speak. Ser Island's sword had stood at her shoulder. Murder had been tasted and swallowed. When the doors opened, the stench of fear washed over him so thick it made him blink. Lanterns burned in iron hoops, and women's eyes shone like beads. A little singer with sagging cheeks clutched a tin cup. Sansa Stark stood near the dais in a plain gown, hands folded, mouth set in a line of held tears. He had expected golden hair to strike him first in that chamber. Instead, it was a girl's northern hair in a shadowless candlelight, and the look she turned on him made him think of Ned Stark turning a thing over in his palm, weighing a word for truth. She curtsied, a small stiff dip. Her eyes slid to the dais, and then he saw the queen. Cersei Lannister had not chosen to robe herself in humble cloth. She wore a scarlet gown whose hem had drunk the night's spilled wine, and at her throat a golden lion snarled at him with jaws full of rubies. Her hair had come free from its fastenings, a wild glory about a face thinned by rage. When she saw him, she did not curtsy. She did not bow. She lifted her chin, and if her hand trembled upon the arm of the chair, no one in that room dared mark it. So, she said, the beggar king's sea-dog and the brother who broke oaths more elegantly. And now the other brother. Will you murder me where I sit, Stannis? It will please your red priestess, I am sure. I am king, Stannis said. You will be tried for high treason and the murder of King Robert Baratheon. Joffrey is stripped of all titles. It is over. It is not over, she hissed. The lion does not bend to crabs and fishers. My son is no son of Robert, Stannis said. He had thought of trying for gentleness. The taste of smoke in his mouth made it too hard. The realm will know it. You may keep your lies for the stranger. She showed her teeth. And who will tell them? Your dung-streaked sailors groaning on beds of rushes? Your goat-smelling soldiers who do not know which sept to kneel in? Or your witch, with her shadow cats and her burning gods? My father, your father will not reach you in time to save your neck, Davos said, quietly enough to let her feel the softness. Your grace, he added to Stannis. The girl, he nodded. Lady Sansa Stark, Stannis said. You are released from any vows or bonds taken upon you by Lannister force. You will be honored in this court as a guest of the king. Cersei laughed then, the wildness of it scraping on the stones. A guest, she said. You'll make her a hostage and then call her guest, and then you will say that the honor of kings runs in chains. I have sat too long in rooms like this to be fooled by that kind of honor, Stannis. Enough, he said. He lifted a hand and the room fell silent. He could feel the tremble in his own fingers from lack of sleep and held it still. Ser Royand. The Stormlander stepped forward. Island Payne watched with his mouth, a slash in a slab, eyes bubbling. Take the queen to a cell, Stannis said. Take Ser Island's sword. Take the cups and the wine. If any woman here is harmed a hair, I will hold you to it. Cersei stood. Touch me and I'll claw your eyes out, she said. Too soft, too calm. You will never wear a crown that does not sit crooked, Stannis. You are a narrow man and narrow men break. He did not answer. He watched as two of Roland's men, freshly washed and shaking with that cleanness, closed upon her. She went with her chin high. Her hair brushed his shoulder as she passed. He did not turn toward her. Lady Sansa, Davos said. He had the voice of a father losing sons, raw and careful both. Come away now. She came, and as she stepped down she slipped on a spill of wine, and for a heartbeat Stannis thought he saw a blade flash in someone's sleeve. A nervous trick of his own exhausted mind, but it was only light off a cup. Davos took the girl's elbow gently and guided her. And he, the king, stood and did nothing as a child went where he sent her. That was as it should be. It still tasted bitter. In the yard, Cloud waited. Stannis climbed Baelor's steps with the High Septon and Davos behind him and Melisandre to his right like a flame that had learned to bide its time. The square below was full but not pressed. The people of King's Landing had been frightened into their holes and now crawled out in ones and twos to see what news. Hape their fear must take. Old men with missing teeth. Women with tired hands. Boys all knees who shifted from foot to foot. Men whose arms were banded with the marks of oars. The city's smell rose. A mix of bread not yet baked and corpses not yet buried. He did not wait for a herald. His voice carried with the roughness it always had when too many eyes pinned him. I am Stannis of House Baratheon, he said. By the laws of succession I am the rightful king of these 7 kingdoms. By the law of men, by the truth of blood, by the test of battle. I did not seek this city for love of its stones. I took it for the sake of order and justice. You have been ill-served, by men who wore lions and by men who wore crowns. I will see that it ends. He let them hear the scrape of honesty and plainness. Melisandre did not move. The High Septon at his back made a noise like a prayer rising and then choking. The boy who called himself king is the child of the queen and her brother, Stannis said. There was a murmur like a net thrown upon water. It is false. It is treason. It will be tried and proved. He did not glance behind him to see if the old man in his embroidered robe flinched. I will not burn your septs. I will not strip your shelves. The men who tried to drown the city in green fire will die as the law allows. The ones who live will work. Those who fought me and lay down arms will be spared if they bend the knee. Those who robbed their neighbors will answer to me. If you come to the steps of Baelor with a grievance, I will hear it. He paused just long enough. Bread will be given first to widows and children, he added. There was a time the king's ships carried onions into a siege and saved men from eating their shoes. I remember the taste of shoes. A ripple of laughter rolled like a wind through wheat, cautious and hungry. There are 2 fewer ships now. That will be mended. He turned without flourish. Melisandre's eyes burned with a private fire he could neither see nor trust. Davos wore no triumph. He might never again. He heard it before he saw it. The hush take a new shape, the crowd's breath lock as the men of the city watch dragged a raw rope to the foot of the steps. Between them stumbled a boy with hair like clean wheat who kept trying to lift his chin as though it were heavy. His lips had already begun to shape words, and when he saw the king, those words broke against his teeth. Joffrey Baratheon's wrists were bound. Tyrion's careful cloth of gold had been stripped from him. His mouth twisted like his mother's, only younger, crueler from lack of practice. "You are not king," he hissed. "I am king. You cannot." "I can," Stannis said, "and I will. Your mother will stand trial. You do not need to." The boy shuddered the way a dog does when rain hits it unexpected. For the first time, something like human fear crossed his face. "My grandfather is not here," Davos said. The bells kept tolling. In the tremble at the edge of Stannis' temper, Melisandre's low voice slid. "The boy is a darkness born of darkness, a king of lies. His blood would make the sword." "No," Stannis said. Her words were soft. His cut the air. "We are not in Dragonstone." She bowed her head, and the ruby at her throat gently throbbed like a quiet heart. He would have liked to sleep. He would have liked to wash the stink of wildfire out of his hair. Instead, he looked at a boy and saw a branch that had grown the wrong way. Robert should have cut it when it was green. He had not. The cutting was left to him, as always. "Ser Island," he said, and then remembered that Ser Island Payne had been stripped of his sword and hauled down to the cells. "Ser Roland, take the office in the moment. The law is the law." Roland Storm drew the great sword with a rasp that sounded to Stannis like a page being torn. The crowd pressed forward and then back, not certain which would place them nearer to fear or farther from it. Joffrey tried to twist away. He made a noise that started as a word and ended as a child's sound. Stannis held himself still, every muscle stubborn against the advance of exhaustion. The blade fell. Bells tolled. Green smoke drifted like memory. The city breathed out, and then it breathed in again, and it had a king. That night Stannis did sleep at last. Sleep was a hard coin, and he had spent his fill and more besides in the last 2 days. When he woke, Davos was at the foot of the bed as if he had been carved there, and Melisandre stood at the window with the darkness on her shoulders like a cloak. "The High Septon has agreed to witness your claim," Davos said. "He will stand before Baelor's doors with you and speak of the Book of Lineages. He has found the pages Lord Aaron marked." "Good," Stannis said. He sat up. His bones hurt. "The small council? They are small indeed," Davos said, and allowed the corner of his mouth to move. "Pycelle has been dragged out of his bed and protests at every turn while he fumbles with his chain. Littlefinger has flown the city, on the back of a bird, perhaps. Varys is vapor or spider silk. Qyburn? Who?" "A mummer's leech," Davos said. "He came with men out of Harrenhal and smiles too much. The city does not lack for creatures that smile too much." "Make a council," Stannis said. "We have no time for the city's habits. The treasurer's books will be found. The coiners will be brought and counted. The crown's debts will be gathered like thistles, tied tight and sorted. The watch must be paid, or we will be back at the gates again tomorrow." "And the hand?" Davos asked. Stannis looked at the man and saw smoke and salt dried on his beard and a bend in his shoulders that would not quicken again. A smuggler, an honorable smuggler. And of all the men who had called him king, the one who had never sought to make his name out of saying it. "You are hand," Stannis said. "Wash before you sit my counsel, or I will hear of it." Davos opened his mouth, close, Diet, and bowed so deeply his head nearly struck his knees. When he lifted it, his eyes were bright. "Your Grace," he said, and that was all. Melisandre turned from the window, the rubies at her wrists answering the one at her throat. "The night brings word," she said. As it always does, ravens have thrashed the dark. The wall sends cries. The dead walk in the snow and wear blue stars in place of eyes. I have dreamed of a sword drawn in the cold. I have dreamed of a king's shadow burning on ice. The wall, Stannis said. He scrubbed a hand across his face and felt the rasp of stubble. He had not had a beard worthless since Dragonstone. It will wait a day. We have a city to chain and a realm to pull straight. We cannot march north with bread riots at our backs and Tywin Lannister at our throats. Your Grace, Melisandre said, and there was something like patience in it, the terrifying kind. The true war is not here. Davos shifted. There is a letter, he said. Lord Commander Mormont's hand. Not all of it is clear, but the part that speaks of dead men, he means it. Still, the city. We will hold both, Stannis said, and felt for the first time since the smoke had thinned an edge of himself return. Not the keenest edge, but the kind that did not dull with every blow. We will hold both. For 3 days they held the city like a thing that had always tried to buck and run. Bread began to appear where it had not. Bakeries opened with soldiers at their doors to keep the rich from stripping them. The gold cloaks were remarked or removed. The kettle blacks put in irons while they cursed and laughed in turns. And Haleen was pulled like a careworn badger from a hole full of stoppered jars green as bile. Tyrion Lannister woke, swore, bled some more, woke again, and managed a bitter grin at Davos when the hand came to see him. So, the dwarf croaked, you won the city. The river fought harder than you did, Davos said. He could not help studying the man's eyes. They were clever even when cracked by pain. You should not have lit so much of it. I lit what I could, Tyrion said. I was very nearly lit myself. My thanks to your king for not having me thrown while unconscious from the walls with the jars. It would have made a better tale. It would have been a shorter one, Davos said. If you have come to gloat, you will need to come back when my head hurts less, Tyrion said. And if you have come to ask where Varys or Petyr Baelish are, I will tell you what I told my father. Varys is wherever the secrets are thickest, and Petyr Baelish is wherever the money is sweetest. I mislike the thought that it is the same place. I came to ask where Tommen is, Davos said and watched. The dwarf's face did a small thing, all the more telling for being small. Rosby, Tyrion said. If his mother's wit stayed with her, he is likely halfway to Rosby and a new set of guards by now. Lancel is a fool, but not such a fool as to keep the boy near a falling city. He looked at Davos's missing fingers, his eyes flicking and returning. You will be wanting him to, what? Sit on a lap and murmur innocence when his mother hangs. His innocence is not in question, Davos said. Everything is in question, Tyrion said. He looked at the ceiling through a pane that cut him into pieces. Even bread in this city. We will make it keep, Davos said. He left before the dwarf could answer with the kind of wit that skinned. By the 5th day, the smell of corpses was not quite so heavy. By the 6th, the old man they had hauled from his bed to beard the council in tremble and spittle had remembered how a maester's chain sat upon his throat, and Pycelle had found an old dignity under his blotches. He pushed for pardons where pardons would silence snarling. Stannis allowed them where the bite had gone out of the jaw. He moved with a certainty that made the city's heartbeat slow and then begin to beat again, and he slept more than 3 hours only when Melisandre pressed a cup into his hand that made the world drift. On the 7th day, word came that Tywin Lannister, who had marched from the west on a night when the stars had been green, had turned his host away from the city like a man who had put his hand on a hot stove and would not try it twice. He had withdrawn toward the black shell of Harrenhal, gathering up stragglers like a woman raking spilled grain. With him were roses. The Tyrell banners did not hang now upon the walls of a saved city. They wheeled in the fields with helms tight and eyes like knives, and they watched for what Stannis would do next. He did not do what Davos half feared and Melisandre half hoped. He did not drag the High Septon to the stake and light him with jars of the city's bad fire. He sat him down and made him sign a paper whose language was as careful as the law could be, and had him stand up before Baelor and tell the people that a king's seed had run false and the realm would be better now. It cost the old man a year of his life to speak the words, and afterward he went to his bed and was attended by 3 pale septas and would not come out for a week. On the 10th day, the red wine fleet's long shadows pricked the sea. It was said Mace Tyrell had ordered a blockade to starve the city and force the stag from the stones. Davos took the news like a challenge, not an insult. He sent for the Sea Lords of Driftmark and for men who read the tides like a prayer, and to Stannis' surprise he found in those white-haired men something like a smile. "The gullet is a trick of water, your grace," Davos said, laying stones upon a scratched table in the council chamber and moving them like ships. "They think the city a sack. They do not think of the channels that snake below Mask and Mirror. The Valerians know those channels. So do I." "Do not lose more ships to pride," Stannis said. "You have seen enough green fire." "I have," Davos said, and closed his eyes for a moment. When he penned them, the quiet was back, the kind that had grown like old oak wood in him after he had been made to choose which fingers he loved most. "I will bring grain." He did. At midnight he took black hulls through black water with lanterns hooded, and the men of the Red Wine Fleet woke to smoke and flares in the wrong places and found their own lines snarled in channels where no ship should lie. And before noon there were 2 big-bellied cogs anchored under the walls with barley enough to make a week of bread if you did not ask for the crust to be as thick as yesterday's. Davos's eldest son had been a ghost in his mind on nights like that. When he came back, the ghost did not weigh less. Stannis did not thank him with words because Davos did not need words, only work. In the cells, Tyrion Lannister healed slowly and asked for a book. He was sent one. He laughed until he coughed blood when he realized it was the same book Lord Aaron had marked. "You are crueler than you look, Onion Knight," he said when Davos next came. "Or more clever. It is the only book the High Septon will part with this week," Davos said. "He has fallen in love with it." "I loved it first," Tyrion said dryly. "It cost me all manner of things. I suppose it will cost me my head now. Ah well, if it does, ask your king to have me beheaded by a butcher blunt enough to make a song of it." "The king does not make songs," Davos said. "That is a pity," Tyrion said. "It may prove the death of him." On the 12th day, a raven came with feathers darker even than Stannis' knights. It brought Lord Commander Mormont's letters in a hand that looked like wind had written it, and the words spoke of snow that swallowed men whole and blue eyes in dead faces. Stannis read them, his face unreadable, and then read them again. Davos saw the king's mouth pull the way it did when he had to name the price of a thing and disliked both the price and the man who said it. "Your Grace," Melisandre said, listening with her ears turned inward. "The wall drinks light like a well without bottom. It will drink kingship if it must. If you go, the Lord will make you long. He will put your shadow there and return it to you. The wall will still be standing when our sons' bones are dust if men keep it," Pycelle said fussily, unhelpful as a fly. "There are no others, your grace, only tales told to." "Enough," Stannis said. The word made the old man's jowls jump. "There are always tales. There are always men who die because the tales are true and because they are believed only after the dying." He looked at Davos. "If I ride north," he said softly, a softness like the last scrape of a whetstone on iron, "this city will not hold to me because I am the right king. It will hold because I leave it held." Davos felt the weight he had been waiting for descend like a hand upon his neck. "I will hold it," he said. He made it a promise, not a boast. "By the law and the bread." By the 15th day, with the Red Wine Fleet licking its wounds and the Reach shouted back to its own shores by lack of boldness, Stannis Baratheon set a crown properly upon his head before Baelor September and was anointed with oil he did not love by a man who did not love him either, and the realm, or a piece of it, which was what the realm had become, accepted what the law demanded. The coiners resumed their clink and the bakers their kneading. The ditch diggers dug more ditches because that was all there was to do. Cersei Lannister stood trial with Pycelle's quavering voice reading charges in a list that went too long and Melisandre's eyes half-lidded. The queen lied as she had always lied, elegantly at first and then in gasps as truth narrowed her breath. Evidence mounted like snow flattening a poor man's roof. Stannis did not enjoy it. He only endured it. When the judgment came, it was spoken with language the law had used so often the words had worn smooth. He gave her a clean death because the realm needed a clean death more than it needed a lesson in fire. Her golden hair was washed and braided before the sword, and she went to it with her chin high. She looked at Stannis at the last as if, even then, she would not give him what he had come for. The blade fell. The city held its breath and then let it go in a long white cloud, cool as winter. News from the Riverlands came like stones pitched at a calm pond and set rings going out. Tywin Lannister had bent his red, had picked up his roses, had planted himself deep at Harrenhal, and from there sent letters like arrows. He had written to House Frey in a hand that promised fat. He had written to Bolton with a whisper that stroked the wrong way. He had written to Hoster Tully's perishing body and to men who fancied themselves the bones of the river. He had written to Mace Tyrell as one fat man writes to another with sugared words that glistened and rotted. But a city held by law gave some men who might have wavered a reason to put their pens down and wait. Bread in one hand and a sharp gallows under the window was a persuasiveness even Tywin sometimes underestimated. Robb Stark kept his crown in the north and did not bend it toward the south like a man bringing a bowl of water to his betters. Scouts said he had taken more castles than he had lost. He wrote a letter that came by a circuitous path to the king in King's Landing and said, with a boy's dignity grown up too fast, that the North had not made a king to unmake him at the call of a man who had once called his father friend. Stannis read it twice. He answered with one page and a seal. His letter spoke of law and winter and the fact that two kings could not live in one realm any more than two cocks in one yard. It spoke of Tywin Lannister's letters and what might be thrown into cups when men got thirsty for easy power. It offered a name, Warden of the North for a Stark, under a king who would not flatter them with honey or stab them with roses. It did not offer pardon. Stannis' pardons were for those who took the knee and felt the stone under it. He sent Sansa Stark's own letter along with his, written in a neat hand and bearing a little blot of ink where she had stopped and breathed too long over a word before moving on. She asked for her mother. She asked for an end to heads on spikes. She did not ask to go home. That would come, Stannis saw, if it came after winter. When he left the city, he left at the head of a smaller host than the one that had come to its walls. The Blackwater had taken its price. Melisandre rode with him like a shadow that had found a saddle. Celis Florent and the Queen's men were glum with piety, and Shireen had a doll pinned to her saddle and eyes too large. Stannis kissed her brow before he turned north, a thing he had done only twice before in years carved by duty like grooves in stone. The kiss surprised them both. Celis smiled as if a god had been given a blood tithe and not a child a father's touch. Davos, standing below the steps of the keep, saw only the angle of a man's mouth and knew it for a moment of grace that would not last. He watched them go, and then he went back to the council chamber with its tall windows that let in a King's Landing light he would never love and thought of the sea. The work waited for him in piles like sand and in spills like tide. He set his hand to it and made himself into a sandbag against which the city might lay. 2 days later, he received word that Tommen had indeed been conveyed to Rosby. The boys' host had turned west. Tywin had not dared to roll his dice further. He would keep a kingling in a castle and crown him with ink and songs, if not with steel and oil. "Will you take him?" Melisandre had asked before she rode with Stannis, as she stood upon the steps and smiled mildly at the crowd. "The boy's blood has music in it. The Lord favors music. I will not slit the throat of a child to tune your harp," Davos had said, and the certainty that answered in him had surprised even him. "I am not that kind of hand. You are a hand that shakes when he holds a knife," she had said kindly. "It is not a fault, Onion Knight. It is an offering you make to your old gods without knowing." "My old gods do not take knives," Davos had said. "Men do." She had laughed and ridden away in a drift of red silk. At the wall, the horns blew. The same breath of ravens that had broken over the city's towers broke blacker over that long knife of ice, and Jon Snow, who had lost a father to kings and a sword brother to necessity, lifted his head from the cold and heard a sound that a boy hears only once and then belongs to for the rest of his life. He had gone to ground among trees with a face he knew too well, and he had bled for a name he kept in his mouth like a stone. He had climbed again when Mance's army pressed like snow sliding off a roof, and he had felt the hard wood of the gate and known that wood would splinter if help did not come. He did not know that help was already on the road. A hard-faced king with a harder will and enough men to turn a wildling host if fire and good ground stood with them. Stannis's banners did not look like salvation to men who lived by watchfires. They were tight to the wind and cold to the eye. But when the wind snapped them into place at the edge of the forest, and when horse hooves shook the crust of snow, and when steel flashed in blue light, the men on the wall put their mouths open and sound came out, and it tasted like iron and relief. Stannis came like a knife from the side at dawn and cut the wildlings away from their ladders and ropes as if cutting rot from a barrel of apples, throwing the bad to the pigs and saving what could be saved. An arrow took a man at his right, and he did not notice until later. Blood steamed from its fletching. He did not care for the cries of dying men. He cared that the gate held. Afterward, in the common room of Castle Black, he warmed his hands at a fire that smoked more than it warmed and looked upon the faces of men who wore black and asked so little for it. He found the boy who had climbed between worlds and looked at him. "You are Ned Stark's blood," he said, and saw a flinch that was not flinch but something both deeper and more fierce. "You look like him around the eyes. That is a blessing and a curse." "I am a bastard," Jon Snow said, as if desperation had to be made into something like pride. "Of Winterfell. Bastard or no," Stannis said, "the North needs a Stark. I can make you lawful. I can light the darkness in front of a people who have had no lamp since they crowned a boy and sent him to die in light and song." He paused and saw the boy's breath in front of him like a thing even the air was desperate to hold. "Bend the knee, not to me, to what a king can do for a realm too blind to look to its own wall." It was almost the right words. They came within a hair of the right place and then skated away, as words often did when they tried to come from Stannis's mouth. He watched the boy wrestle with them, and thought of bread, and thought of his own shadow in snow, and thought of the fire Melisandre had watched with eyes that saw what he did not trust. At King's Landing, Davos dealt bread and justice. He hanged a kettle black on the third day he wore the chain and had to tell the rope man to pull twice, for the first knot was poor. He cut free two who had stolen loaves and put them to work where loaves were made. He opened the doors of Chataya's ruined house and wept because there was blood where sweetness had been and a child had once been held in the soft of a woman's arm and then not. And he went home and washed his head under cold water because he would have drunk himself blind if he had not had to sit at a table in an hour and decide whether coin clipped from the king's mint was a theft deserving the hand or the nails. Sansa Stark moved like a quiet cloud through the keep, learning the places where the stones did not echo twice and could be trusted. She spoke with Shireen in a window embrasure where light fell as if afraid to touch them both. Shireen told her about a book of stories where a girl was lost and had to speak a riddle to a harsh sea queen. Sansa told Shireen about Winterfell's lemon cakes and about a singer who had not been brave enough to live. They both listened most closely when the wind made a noise down a corridor that had no door. In the west, Tywin Lannister considered murder as a moral instrument and decided, at last, that the coin it cost might yet bring more than it took. He wrote again to Lord Walder Frey, and this time wrote with the steel of a man who did not bend at cities lost. He promised him thick slices of the Riverlands and the pleasure of a song sung by frightened men. He wrote to Roose Bolton and told him the law could be shaped like wax if it were held the right way. He wrote to Mace Tyrell and said, in that round hand, that the stag would go north and the city would sag without a rose to hold it, and would the Lord of Highgarden like to plant one? Tywin was a man who understood that if you could not hold a thing, sometimes it sufficed to make it so no one else could hold it easily either. But even Tywin could not unmake the shape the law had taken in a city where a dry man had made people believe that bread might be had if blood stopped trying to buy it. The red wedding he planned limped like a beast with a broken leg, snarled at, snapped at, but never fast enough to catch its prey. Robb Stark crossed the twins and kept his banners clean and his neck unslit, because someone, perhaps an old man with a conscience, perhaps a boy with a thought of his sister in a city now not wholly a charnel house, rode a day and a half to a place where a secret crossed a road. They warned Edmure Tully, and Edmure for once did not stop to think of his own pride before he thought of someone else's honor. The singers would not have liked it as well as a massacre, but they found a way. In the north, Theon Greyjoy burned and froze and learned grief. That tale wound its own way through snow and teeth. Stannis heard pieces of it as he moved pieces of men upon white ground and tried to make a shape that would break the Boltons without breaking the winter to come. He found the mountain clans like stones that rolled when the right hand pushed and would not when the wrong hand did. He offered names and titles and the weight of his own word. He found that his word meant more in snow than it had ever meant in sun. At the wall, men lit fires and some went out and some did not. Melisandre watched flames and smiled at things that would have frightened other men more than they knew. "There is a girl in gray," she said to no one, or to the boy who had almost become the Lord of Winterfell if not for a mouth that had found a word it could not swallow. "Crowned in ice. She gives a king a sword and the sword bites." "Words," Stannis said. He was tired of them. He wanted iron. He wanted men to move when told and bread to rise when needed and snow to fall where it would not choke breath. He wanted the law to do what it said it did. He stood on the wall and looked east and then west, and the world felt too large for any man to fix and too small not to try. In the city, Davos saw Peter Baelish's shadow cross light and knew the man had been in his house a half hour past when no one had noticed. He tightened guards on places that had no names. He would not win all the games that Spider and Bird and Fox played, but he could set mousetraps and he did. When he found a small boy with his tongue taken and a coin under his heel, he took the coin and gave the boy bread and did not ask who had paid for what. Some things you do because you can do them without becoming someone else. One evening Sansa came to the great hall where Dabber the butcher and Moria the baker and 3 men whose names began with Baratheon waited to be heard, and she asked if she might stand a moment where music had been made for cruelty. Davos watched her, ready to step forward if she faltered. She did not. She stood and listened while Dabber spoke of pigs taken on the first day of the battle and Moria spoke of flour locked up in a cellar and not found again, and the men with the Baratheon name spoke of debts the crown owed their father from when the stag had both antlers. She listened. When Dabber's voice began to shake with his own anger, she stepped forward and put her hand on the table and said, "We will pay what we owe." And it was not a promise binding in law, but in that hall full of smoke and people who had learned that promises were wind, it felt like one. Later Davos told Stannis, and Stannis nodded without letting his face move and said, "Good," and then asked how many jars of wildfire remained unaccounted for. He did not have to add, "Find them." He never added what he did not need. Tywin Lannister died not upon a privy, but in a bed where no one could see him fart. The piss that had kept him from life finally did its work at night while a minstrel in the next room played a song about a rose that had stuck a finger with its own thorn. Mace Tyrell wept and then wrote a letter that withdrew his fleet from the gullet in exchange for trade concessions so large Davos could not read them without wanting to spit. The Reachmen returned to their fields with the smugness of men who had remained themselves while others changed. The West turned upon itself like a man trying to scratch where it could not reach. Casterly Rock stood and would stand until waves threw the last bones against it. Tommen sat at Rosby with a crown too big for his head, and a mother who was now a memory with golden hair. 2 kings breathed in one realm and did not meet. That is sometimes how peace begins, if it ever begins at all. From the wall, Stannis wrote letters. He wrote to Davos, and the letters were like rivers in winter. Slow, deep, tough. He spoke of now and men whose breath froze in their beards and of wildlings whose children shivered differently than southern children. He spoke of Jon Snow with a respect that did not love him and with a calculation that did. He spoke of Melisandre's fire and of nights where the stars looked like ice caught in a black jar. "The law is cold," he wrote once, almost as a jest. "It suits this place." Davos wrote back about bakers and coiners and saltfish and a girl who had learned to walk hallways in a way that made the air listen. "The realm stands because we are holding it up," Davos wrote once, then scratched the line and wrote again. "The realm stands because we hold our part." They held it through a winter that began like a wolf coming down out of trees and then stayed, patient and thorough. The snows made the roads a memory and the sea a threat. The dead did walk. Men put iron to heads that wore blue eyes and discovered that songs had not lied about that, at least. The Lord of Light burned bright in some places and in others burned out, leaving only ash for men to cough upon. Melisandre smiled and once, in a moment no one saw, sat down hard upon a bench and pressed her palms to her eyes and rocked. In King's Landing, a spring came that was not spring but a lessening of misery. There were flowers in pots again and women selling them with needful cheer. Bread had a crust you might call a crust if you squinted. Men were hanged less often. Sansa walked once to Baelor's steps and put her hand upon the cold stone and felt something like peace and something like the weight of a thing that would outlast her. In the north, Stannis made a list of names and crossed out some and underlined some and put dots by others. He did not like the Lady of Bear Island when he met her because she told him that Winterfell was a Stark place and would never be his, and then he liked her very much indeed because she had told him true and would fight when he told her it was time. He met a man with skin like old bark who smiled with his eyes and did not smile with his mouth and told him that the old gods would have him if he came to certain trees at certain nights. He did not go to those trees. He stood upon the ice and looked north and decided that the law was not enough here, that iron and fire and night would have to take other shapes. He wrote one last letter to Davos. It was shorter than most. It said, "Hold the city. If I fall, the law will not fall with me so long as there are men who keep it." It said, "If I live, I will come back with winter in my beard and a sword that has tasted ice and fire and found neither to its liking." It did not say, "Tell my daughter I did my duty," because that would have been a soldier's boast, and he was a king and he knew the difference. Davos held the city. Bread went out. Coin came in. Tyrell ships took cargo at the quays and sailed away to round fat tables. The brothels opened in a quiet way that offended no one who mattered. The September heard prayers that were more about gratitude than fear. He had a gallows taken down one morning and put back up that evening, and when a boy asked him why, he said, "Because men forget very quickly," and then bought the boy an orange and told him to share it with his sister. Sansa learned to write letters that asked for what could be had and not what could not. She learned to eat slowly when food was good and to stop before she was full because that was how you remembered what hunger was, and if you remembered it you were kinder. She learned that kindness and pity were not the same thing and that justice and revenge did not share a bed except in stories. She watched men bow to the throne that was there because they feared it and men bow to the law because they understood it, and of the two she liked the second kind of bow better because it still allowed a man to stand straight after. Out beyond the wall there were things that had never bowed to anything, and Stannis found them, and fought them, and learned that sometimes the law is a fire you carry with you because the wind keeps trying to blow it out. He was not Azor Ahai. He was a man who made promises to himself and kept them because to do otherwise would have broken something in him he had not had time to name. Melisandre did not mind. Her gods were a long game. Stannis was a shorter one. Men still must eat between prophecies. The war did not end. It rarely does. It moved in new shapes like a river around stones. Kings died and were born, and the realm learned new songs. In King's Landing, a statue went up on Baelor's steps. It was not large, and it was not gilded, and it showed a man in a plain cloak with one hand raised as if to ask for silence or call for a loaf to be shared. The sculptor had never seen the man himself, only heard that he had been a smuggler once and had become a hand later, and had dealt bread and gallows with the same face. No one ever made a statue of Stannis Baratheon that satisfied anyone. His face refused to be carved into anything other than itself. The closest anyone came captured the mouth set when he read a letter about snow and dead men and resolved that a law must be made where there was no law and a line drawn where the world had become nothing but circles. On a night when the city was not afraid, Sansa walked alone along the outer wall and looked east where dawn would come. She thought of the father she had lost, and the mother lost differently, and the brother somewhere under banners in a cold place who would never be little again. She thought of a boy king whose head had been removed and of a woman whose hair had been washed before her end and who had left behind a son too innocent for any of it. She thought of a man who had taken a crown not because he wanted it but because no one else would pick it up and put it on straight. She thought of bread. She smiled the tiniest piece of a smile and felt, without looking, the city breathe beside her. It was a harsh breath, a scarred one. It was life. Above the wall, A light went up where no light had any sensible right to be, and men with black upon their shoulders opened their eyes and found themselves, for a heartbeat, unafraid. Stannis Baratheon stood in that light and did not see it, because he was looking at a man whose sword had just broken and whose eyes were still clear and whose breath smoked in the night like a promise no one else would hear. He stepped forward. He lifted his own blade. He did what he had always done. He held